practice mode and going live, so anything you say from this point forward will be recorded.
Recording in progress.
Just give me a second to see it on here.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Welcome to the June 7th Utility Advisory Commission. We'll start with a roll call, starting to my very right.
Commissioner Phillips, present.
Commissioner Forcell, present.
Commissioner Metz, present.
Commissioner Croft, present.
Commissioner Motter, present.
And Chair Siegel is present and Vice Chair Scharf is not present today. There are no changes to the agenda, so we will move on to any public comment on a topic that is not on the agenda tonight.
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes from last meeting? Does anybody want to move to approve the minutes as submitted?
Second.
And I think we can do this by voice call. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes are approved. We'll turn to the Utilities Director for his report.
Good evening, Chair Siegel, Commissioners. I have a few items I'd like to discuss tonight. Just wanted to give a quick update on where we are with our rate updates. Our financial 2024 financial plans and proposed utility rate adjustments will be presented to the City Council on this coming Monday, June 19th. Approved rate changes will take effect on July the 1st. And the city staff is sharing information about the utility rate changes with our customers through a variety of communication channels. Hopefully all of you received a postcard in the mail that talked a little bit about the SFPUC doing their pass-through, and the rate actually dropped from when we first came and talked to you about this. So that rate is actually going to be a 5% increase. We still have a negative 5% on our electric rates, and our gas rates are at 8%. Wastewater stayed at 9%. Refuge is at a 0 rate. And then also our storm drains went up by 4%, which totals out to be basically a 3% increase over the rates from last year altogether, which is about $11.70 on that. So also too, I believe it was in May, we went to the council to give in a study session to talk about all of our rates and our financial plans at that period of time. And they approved the gas rate and the electric rate that same night. So that won't be heard on this coming Monday, but all the other rates, including fiber, will be on that as well. As I talked a little bit about the SFPUC passing on those rates on May 9th, that's when the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission voted to increase the wholesale water rate. And then we're going to pass that through. So it will change the W1, 2, 4, and 7 rate proposals, and that'll come effective on July the 1 as well. And that's where that 5% we were thinking when we first started coming to you and talking about it was around 7%. So it's dropped a couple percent because of those reasons. Also too is that the final winter rebates have been distributed throughout the residents. There was a fixed rebate based on January's bills cost at $2.2 million. We added $99,000 into the rate assistance program. And then we had $62,000 set aside for customers in the rearage, which came out to be a total of about 25,500 customers. Remember, these were just for residential rates. And it came out to be basically at $2,379,000 was the rebate total. We have not received any applications for the one-time high bill financing assistance program, which closes at the end of October. We have been diligent about putting it up on the website. We've sent out email to those folks that are still in the rear, but we have had no takers from our residents at this period of time. There is also information about that on the city's Palo Alto's.org website under utility assistance. So low income or residents that are still having difficulties paying some of those bills can take advantage of those dollars that are still allocated for that process. Good news is that we continue to see natural gas prices and commodity prices in the market extraordinary high. As we talked about, they were about $5 per therm. We capped it off at our customer price at $4, and the gas prices have now stabilized by about 29%, which is down to 36 cents a therm. So that's what we're seeing. And we thought that those prices would be now aligning with the season trends and expected to remain consistent throughout the summer sessions. Each year, we prepare our water quality report, and it's an annual consumer confidential report that goes out to water quality, talks about the conditions of the previous year. And we'll be notifying customers this month that the 2022 report update is available online and then printed upon request. But the full report's always available on our website at the waterresources.org portion of it. As you can imagine, that hydroelectric supplies are well, even though that we haven't had any rain, basically stopped from this period of time. But as you can imagine, snow levels are still way high, about 129% still, and approximately 125% of the average for 24. And if we get average rainfall for 24 in October starting, we expect that the average hydro generation in 25 will continue to be in good shape for at least in the near future, even if we get average rainfall in the coming year. Just a little bit about the drought update. SFPUC's 11% volunteer water reduction remains in place, but staff's expecting that once the state emergency regulation expires in June, that Palo Alto will be able to lift the 2-day per week restrictions on watering within a 48-hour of the rain events and ban on irrigation non-functional turf with portable water at commercial sites. So we think that will get lifted sometime towards the end of this month. Just some upcoming events that you should be aware of. Saturday, June 24th, we have a spring planting workshop at 10 a.m. June 29th, we have rain and garden workshop. And then July the 6th, save money with EVs and EV discount campaign. That's from 5 to 6. And then also too is, as I mentioned before, Saturday, July the 15th is the MSC open house from 9 to 2. And we'll be hosting that along with all the departments at the city. Should be pretty exciting. We're actually going to have a helicopter this year that will come in that will support the airport side. And then utilities will continue having a great showcase as we move forward with that. So again, we're looking forward to that. And then we'll also have EVs up front again, as we did last year. So we're pretty excited about looking forward to the July 15th timeframe. And that concludes my report. Can I answer any questions?
Any questions from any commissioner?
Thank you.
That last event you described, what is the title of it?
Oh, it's MSC Open House. So it's the municipality center that's located
Okay.
on Bayshore. So what we do is we have an event. We ask for all the departments to get involved, and they actually have booths, and we set it up. And everybody brings information about, could be around rec department programs, HR's there. We also have our planning section and permitting section will be there this year. And then some of the big events, like I said, utilities takes one side of usually the yard portion of the MSC. We bring out our big trucks and we showcase pretty much all of our equipment that we have during that period of time.
And is it primarily for residents? I
Yes.
hadn't heard about it before.
Yeah, so it is for residents. So what we end up doing is that we'll be taking out some ads in local papers. We'll be sending out emails, blasts out to everyone. We're going to hang some signage out at the MSC high enough that folks usually see it on the freeway side. And then at the day of, we usually raise the banner portion of it as you enter into the gates at the MSC. But it's all for residential and business folks in Palo Alto or even outside of Palo Alto. No charge, free.
Any other commissioner questions?
Yeah. Have you issued rebate programs or financial assistance programs in the past? And I'm just wondering what kind of additional outreach measures we might take as a community to reach the people who are still in arrears or haven't yet applied for this rebate program?
So folks that are in the rears, we usually contact them directly. It's actually a warm touch phone call. We're able to run reports and see where people are, where they are with their bills. And so we don't usually do flyers. We don't usually do any kind of bill stuffers in those areas. We actually, like I said, we actually call them and let them know that there's financial aid at this period of time.
Has that just not happened yet, given that the deadline's in October?
We have. We've made some
okay.
phone calls and folks say that they're fine. And it's hard, it's hard for me to believe that we do have these funds. We did open it up that typically it's a one-time deal that we'll pay folks. But in this case, when we opened this up for these rebates, we actually took that policy and we basically during this period of time, we opened it up again to anybody that's in need at that point. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Phillips?
Have you been contacted by people who are confused about the rebate? I found it, maybe I would have been one of those people, but I found it hard to understand when I was first looking at my bill. It looked like it was added, subtracted and then added. And then there was no message with the bill except in the small type section. The second paragraph of small type said that there was a rebate. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if a number of people didn't realize that there was a rebate here or were just confused what was going on. Has that been any complaints or questions of that type?
We have received some calls. We haven't been overwhelmed by those calls from these rebates. There are still some rebates that will take place here in the middle of June. So next week or the week after, I guess that's almost the end of the month, that will still be receiving because of how their billing was. And by the time that we went through council to get this all approved. So they haven't seen those rebates as of yet. But the majority of folks have seen that. And yes, there has been some inquiries about trying to explain the bill. So we took that upon ourselves that we probably could have done a much better job on informing of, we had thought at one time that we were actually going to put together, and we did put it together, but it was so complicated of how you should read your bill that we thought it would be more confusion. There was the insert portion of it. But yes, we probably need to look at that if we're going to do this again sometime about some major rebates. That should be a little bit more explanation to it.
Thank you. I agree with your assessment that it would be good to look at how to communicate it more clearly in the future.
Yes.
Any other commissioner questions? I had two quick questions. One, that Commissioner Phillips' question made me wonder whether when we finish the upgrade with the different systems, will that impact what the bill looks like? Because as I recall, there were some restrictions on what we could and couldn't include in the bill.
We probably will, after, I think once the electrification and the grid modernization starts to happen, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to have to do a redesign of our bill at that point. We'll probably have to, we'll have to drop at least some of the gas commodity portions in the bill out. There is conversations that are going on about, the last person that's still on the system, how expensive that's going to be. So there is some conversations looking at maybe it's going to be more titled as an energy bill, because we're thinking about, and this is something that we're trying to work out from a legal perspective from the federal side, if we can mix our funds from the electric and the gas. Before, it's really easy if an auditor comes in and you can audit off of electric and gas and all our utilities. However, we're thinking that there's going to have to be some subsidizing that's probably going to end up happening, or as people start to come down off of that, because, my feeling is that we'll get the early adopters that will come on board first. And whatever that number is going to be, there is going to be more cost than shifted still to from the maintenance standpoint of that gas system that we'll still have to take care of. And so the question is, we've talked about even does the electric side, and if it's legal to do this, to look at, is there a transfer? Is there a transfer of electric funds that go into the gas commodity side? Or can we shift the gas funds and everything into this energy fund that would have all of that? So there will be a redesign of the bill, no matter what we'll have to end up doing with that.
Those are interesting challenges. And then a very different question. I think you said that City Council is also going to be discussing the fiber rate. And I'm wondering, does that mean that the program started and there are...
So there's a yearly fiber rate of an increase that's off of CPI. So it's just driven, it's a given cost. We're not able to move that one way or another. It was set way back, I think whenever the fiber was actually back in 96, I think it was when it was established. it was established that it would be taken off of CPI. So it's a 3% increase.
Okay, that's for our fiber custom, that's for our dark fiber.
That's for all the dark fiber, yes. So we haven't even looked at what the cost would be because since we haven't launched any of the fiber yet at all. So it's just dark fiber.
Got it. That was my confusion. Thank you. Thank you, Director Batchelor. We'll now move on to new business. And the first item is on the annual water shortage assessment report. Are there any public comment?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item 2, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone.
So we do have a presentation. This is going to be a conversation a little bit about just looking at a shortage assessment report from our water resources. And Lisa Belair, our Senior Resource Planner, will be giving the presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you so much. This is Lisa Belair, Senior Resource Planner. Good evening, Commissioners, Council Member. I'm talking about the Annual Water Shortage Assessment Report. And I think on the screen I'm sharing, just want to make sure. So Palo Alto is not anticipating any water shortage this year, I'm happy to say. And conditions this past winter were very wet. That said, Palo Alto is required annually to submit an annual water shortage assessment report to the state. And this is a brief presentation to provide you with some context. All of the urban water suppliers across the state submit their individual water shortage assessment reports by July the 1st to the Department of Water Resources. And then the department prepares a summary report and submits it to the State Water Resources Control Board by September the 1st each year. And the slide here shows the water code sections that have the requirement. And this year, there's no shortage, as I mentioned, and no triggered water shortage actions. Just to step back, last year in June, when we brought you the annual water shortage assessment report for the first time, drought conditions were ongoing, and we had a series of actions the council took in June with the 2-day per week watering and stage 2 actions. And of course, we always have our 8 permanent water use restrictions in place. Since that time, during July to December of 2022, Palo Alto customers reduced their usage by 11%. And that was in line with our water conservation voluntary reduction request from our supplier. As I mentioned, conditions were wet. There were 31 atmospheric rivers from mid-December to the end of March, and that established a remarkable snow season in the Sierras. And the snowpack is currently over 100% of the April 1st median level. The water supplier, SFPUC, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, rescinded its water shortage emergency. And the request for voluntary system-wide water use reductions will expire in a few days on June the 10th. And Palo Alto's water use restrictions follow the state and the SFPUC's restrictions. And so most of our restrictions will expire on June 10th. And this includes the 2-day per week watering and the stage 2 water use restrictions. However, water conservation is a way of life in California, and we're encouraging the wise use of water in Palo Alto. We have in place, as I mentioned, our permanent water waste restrictions and a suite of water conservation programs. You can find out more on our website, Ways to Save, City of Palo Alto /Ways to Save. And we have recently expanded our water conservation program offerings, including Water Smart, which provides data online for customers, and also Water Fluence that provides information on ways to reduce water consumption for large landscape customers. And we are evaluating additional conservation program offerings as part of our One Water plan. So for this item, the next step is for staff to take this to the council on June 19th and ask for council adoption of the report. And the recommendation for the UAC is for the UAC to recommend that the council adopt the 2023 annual water shortage assessment report. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Are there any commissioner questions? Commissioner Motter?
Thank you so much for the report. And yes, we are blessed with a wet year this year. We will not always likely be blessed with similarly wet years. And I'm wondering if there's been any analysis on the accuracy of the voluntary water reductions that stemmed from council changes. So you said there was an 11% reduction. Did they expect to see a 10% reduction or a 15% reduction, just so that we have clarity in future drought years on the anticipated reductions that we will be able to achieve as a city?
That's a great question. Yes, we had a group of staff from different departments monitoring every month how much customers were reducing and analyzing and looking for ways to get more water conservation from different customer classes where we were seeing the need. But yes, the net total for the period from July to December was 11%, and that is in line with what we were being asked to reduce.
Okay.
So if we had seen a difference, we would have recommended some different measures for the council to take.
Great. But you
to send
have this pretty well dialed in of like the measures and the resulting decrease.
Well, we have our water shortage contingency plan, which
Yeah.
outlines all the measures that we're going to take to get to the desired reduction level at each stage of conservation. And so we follow that kind of plan in terms of how to get the reductions. Yes.
Can I ask one more quick follow-up question, which is, do you anticipate that you will also be tracking rebound? I think post-drought rebound is really helpful in anticipating future demand hardening. And so I would just commend you for the analysis that you've done so far and encourage your department to continue it so that you have a stronger sense of how much additional what your rebound is like and what the dynamics of that are, but also how much hardening likely exists within the system.
Yes, we will track that and be happy to provide you any information.
Wonderful. I totally trust you,
Yes.
but I'm really glad to hear that that's happening.
Great.
Nice.
Commissioner Phillips?
Again, it's very nice to read the report, and it's happy news. And my questions are not about the content of the report, but who is this report for? And I know who it's for, but what happens? What impact does this report have? Is there the potential you would send something and the state would come back and say, oh my God, no, you've got to cut back more? Or is it just informational and gets filed with 150 other municipalities? Or what does this report actually impact?
It's informational, and you have to follow the requirements of the state in order to qualify for state loans and grants.
So the
state doesn't.
paperwork.
So it's a requirement that we have to do, and we would only get a response probably if we didn't file it.
Got it. Thank you.
And I would just add that it's, the legislature set in place this requirement in order to try to statewide compile information and do a better job about communicating out drought planning and actions.
But I just wanted to clarify, there's nothing where this is used to allocate resources to cities or judge individual programs.
Great question. No.
Thank you.
Did you have any questions? Okay. I'm just curious about if you've heard any reaction about customers with the water usage report, which I may be calling the wrong thing, but the information that appears on the bill and tells customers how they're doing with their water usage relative to the community. If that's been received well or not, and if you think that's if it has had or will have any impact on conservation.
I think it's been received well, but I don't have any specific updates. So I'm asking if there's any staff here who does.
Carla Daly, Acting Assistant Director. We have had a couple of months worth of reports go out. We're working through some things, finding out that some of the reports are going into folks' junk folders. And so we're trying to sort out the technical aspect of trying to make sure that that is not happening. But so far, I think the response has been mostly positive, and customer service hasn't gotten a ton of, confused or unhappy customers that are getting that report. So we're early in this process, and we're gathering information and trying to look at the click rates and make sure that folks are actually seeing the report show up in their inboxes.
Okay, so it takes an extra step to actually receive the report right now anyway. It's some kind of click through. I thought I saw it just showed up as your, sort of a category of how you're doing relative to your comps.
If you're in my CPAU, I think there's one extra click to get to it. And then there is a home water report that is emailed out to customers as well.
Great, thanks. It'll be interesting to see in 6 months or a year how it impacts behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, this is an action item. So does anybody have a motion to, let me read it correctly, to recommend that council adopt the 2023 annual water shortage assessment report?
I move to adopt the report.
A second?
I second.
And I think we can do this also by oral vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, thank you. So we'll move on to item 3, which is the wildfire mitigation prevention plan. Are there any community comments?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Thank you. And do we have a presentation?
All right. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Jimmy Pachikara. I'm a senior electrical engineer and acting engineering manager. Today, I'll share a brief update on the utilities wildfire mitigation plan. Next slide. Some background information to start. Next, jump one. In 2018, the California legislation passed Senate Bill 901, requiring electric utilities to prepare a wildfire mitigation plan and update it annually. Also, the plan is required to be presented in a publicly noticed meeting and submitted to the California Wildfire Advisory Board each year by July 1st. Utilities plan was first prepared and approved in January 2020, and every 3 years, utilities are required to complete a comprehensive revision of the plan, and that makes this year the first full revision for Palo Alto. Next slide. With the objective being to complete a comprehensive revision, staff focused on the following: any statutorily mandated elements, general suggestions from the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board, information about specific projects, and feedback from the independent evaluators report. As always, this is a collaborative effort with the assistance and input from the fire department, urban forestry, open space, and the Office of Emergency Services. Next slide. Staff's key mitigation activity for reducing wildfire risk is undergrounding 11 miles of overhead electric lines in the foothills area. This project involves installing electric substructure, including conduit and boxes for electric and fiber lines, removing overhead electric and fiber lines from poles, and installing pad mount equipment where possible. This project consists of multiple phases and is expected to be completed in 2025. To date, staff has completed the installation of approximately 2.4 miles of substructure, and the design of the next two phases are currently in progress and nearly completed. The actual undergrounding of some lines and pole removals is expected to begin in the coming months. Appendix A from the plan, which is attachment A, includes updates to other wildfire-related activities. Next slide. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's fine. The last important update to point out is the independent evaluation. Staff retained DUDEC to independently review the plan to determine its efficacy, legal compliance, and provide suggestions for improvement. Retaining an outside expert to review this plan is not a legal mandate. However, staff felt doing so for our first comprehensive revision was prudent and in the best interests of our community. In summary, the evaluation report concluded that Utilities Wildfire Mitigation Plan fulfills the requirements of a plan and meets the statutory requirements for a publicly owned utility. The evaluator concluded with this statement, quote, based on the wildfire prevention programs described in the WMP and the progress that CPAU has made in its wildfire prevention programs, the CPAU takes the risk of wildfire in its service territory seriously and is actively working to reduce the risk that its equipment starts or aids in the spread of wildfire, end quote. So this report is included in attachment B of the staff report. And that concludes our presentation and update. We'll be back in another year for another status, and I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thanks for sharing this. Since it's my first time seeing this.
Sure.
I did have a couple questions. Like there's this map here about this. Is there a red line in the map where the undergrounding is occurring, and then the remaining above ground is in between the gap? In the gap in between, or where exactly is the undergrounding versus the still remaining above ground poles? Or maybe you can just describe it.
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me, but there is a portion that is already undergrounded, which is why that portion is not highlighted. So that's apparently, I think through the Foothills Park area is where it's already existing infrastructure is undergrounded.
I guess my question, the reason I ask is how much remains above ground? And then the mitigation there is like these fiberglass crossbars. I'm just kind of curious for what that is. Like,
yeah, so again, there's about 11 miles of overhead lines through the foothills. And through our assessment, I mean, there's several different things that we could do. But you know, the best approach is just to remove all those lines and put it underground. So that was the approach that the staff decided to take. You know, in addition to that, there's also our regular activities, which is inspecting the lines and clearing the vegetation from it, which we do on a regular basis, you know, annually and right before the fire season.
So did I read this wrong? We're undergrounding everything?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought these fiberglass crossbars were for ones that are not going to be underground, but okay.
Yeah, we're undergrounding everything.
Got it. Awesome. Okay. I was also curious, how many people live in the zones that are affected, and are they seeing this plan and commenting on it? Like, are you getting any feedback, and how are they feeling about the approach that we're taking?
That's not the, you know, how many customers. I think there's about, I'd want to say, I know there's, in terms of meters, I think there's about 150 meters out there, which is not too many. But in terms of Communication, I think most of it's on our website, and, this meeting is the purpose of, communicating, getting the information out there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other Commissioner Field?
Thank you. Then you have two sets of metrics here, performance metrics and outcome metrics. Are these metrics you chose, or are they specified by the state?
No, these are metrics we chose.
So you're more or less free to choose the metrics you report on?
Yeah, more or less. But they are metrics that were, for example, evaluated by our evaluator and seem appropriate for, the course that we're taking.
But who is the evaluator?
That was Dudek, who's an outside consultant.
And is it standard practice to use an outside auditor for these?
No, it's not standard practice. I think initially in 2020, it was required, but this time it was completely voluntary and on our choice.
And we chose to do it because?
Just because, just to be prudent and make sure that we're, doing our due diligence with our plan.
And the primary outcome of the audit was that this is a serious plan and complies with the legal requirements?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other Commissioner Metz and Forcell?
Okay. Yeah, I thought this seems very well written and answers the questions it needs to. One question I had was, with the construction work falling behind, do you think, and given the danger that this represents, do you think we should be outsourcing, more of the construction work to accelerate it?
Well,
Or is that even possible?
it's certainly possible, but again, we went this route because we initially did go out for bid. We put an RFP out there, and the cost was pretty high. It was very high, and I think undergrounding that was for the bids that we got back were for an overhead rebuild. Reconstructing the existing overhead and fire hardening the existing system and leaving it overhead. It wasn't even underground. And so I think it came back around $12 million, if I remember correctly. And undergrounding would have been, even more. And so the approach was that we could do this ourselves. And, we can do it, in-house with our own staff. And if need be, we do have, contractors, engineering contractors, on our books if we need to, or on contract if we need to use them, for falling behind. In addition, we also have our substructure contractor, MP Next Level. And so that's another contract. The majority of the cost is all that civil work. And, we're getting the best price. I mean, that contract we bid out, and we have multiple bids on it, and we choose the best, the best contractor for the city of Palo Alto, and that gives us the best price. So from what I know, from other colleagues in the same industry, the feedback that we've got is that I've gotten personally is that, PG&E, what PG&E is paying for undergrounding their work is much more higher, 10 times the cost than what we're paying.
Okay. So it sounds like we're sort of supervising and using.
Yes, I mean, we're certainly
subbing out discrete chunks of it.
Yeah, I mean, we're using our own contractor. We're there supervising it, making sure that, they're not, wasting time on the job and getting things done and being efficient with their time.
Right. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. I didn't understand that from reading the document. So thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
I have one more question. Oh, sorry.
It's really great to see the progress made. I do remember the initial report and, feeling like there's like a lot of work ahead of the utility. And so, like I said, it's great to appreciate some progress being made. And how many miles did you say were undergrounded already?
2.4 miles is done already. And, we'll be starting on the next two phases very soon.
And so my one question is, did the utility ever attempt to put a price tag on, all of the wildfire mitigation efforts? Just from the starting point of not planning, not having a plan and then making a plan. All right, this is the work that needs to be done. I'm just curious sort of what when all is said and done, we expect will be the level of investment in these measures?
Yeah, the level of investment is really just the undergrounding effort. That is about $12 million, is what we originally estimated. Again, that was because we were going with an outside contract with our RFP, but the other activities is really like maintenance activities. And so we haven't really put a maintenance, a cost to that.
Were the maintenance activities happening anyway, the
Yes,
inspections? And
exactly.
right. So it's just the $12 million is what sort of the utility and the city is investing in.
That's right.
Trying to come up with a permanent solution. And there will be some savings once the undergrounding is completed, I assume, because we don't need to maintain the vegetation and inspect the lines.
Yeah, could be savings there.
Maybe not substantial, but all right.
The line is still there and it does have a useful life to it. And so we still regularly inspect our underground equipment as well. So those items are visited every 3 years. And so doesn't completely go away, but some major activities like tree clearing and things like that, vegetarian clearing, there'll definitely be some cost savings there.
If I could add also too, is that I think it's also the convenience portion of it that not just during the wildfire period of time, but if there's PSP, so high winds, and if it happens at nighttime, those customers are out until the next day. Because what we do is that we have to actually walk that line, and it's in the middle of Foothills Park going all the way up to Skyline. And so we are not going to send the safety of our employees to actually walk that line during the middle of the night. So unfortunately, those customers would be shut off at that period of time. We've had one incident for a PSP where we had to do a power shutoff. And those customers, we were letting them know ahead of time that if these winds can continue, that we were going to have to shut them off. And they were very good about that, but we got up there the next morning, but they were out basically all night long. And so, as Jimmy mentioned, we looked at this when we first put this out. We were thinking maybe it might be a design build. So we would find a contractor that could do the build and also the design. And it was in the tune of around $26 million. And the other thing is that, we're not obligated by the CPUC or even the fire folks that we need to underground this line, as long as we keep the trimming back, as you saw in these diagrams. But we made a conscious effort from a utilities perspective that we think that the long term is much better if it's undergrounded, and the inconvenience of shutting those customers down, as well as Jimmy says, we still do have to our orders, our general orders, that we have to still inspect every 3 years. So we would still continue to inspect that underground section through there.
I just had a question about where the underground facilities go. Is it up the road or does it go through private property?
A lot of it is through easements, existing easements that we have that go through the park. Go around. It's, I'm trying to explain it. It basically goes through the park, some of that open space area, but not exactly through, it's not exactly following the road, no. Maybe parts of it does.
Does it just follow the existing lines?
Yes. That's where we have our existing easement, and that's where it was the easiest to.
Thanks.
I hope the running trail is not impacted when it's underground.
No, some of it is near there, and we are, restoring the trail if we're disturbing it and restoring it back to the way it was.
Great. I had two other questions. Did you have any questions? One is, when you have the public safety, if there's an event that requires the public safety power shut off and an evacuation, do the customers who live up in the hills, do they have an evacuation plan? Has it ever been practiced? Do we do any, drills for them?
So I know the Ken Duker, who is the chief for OES, which is the operations safety. They constantly talk to those folks about, that there's strong cases that something might happen to that. And they actually have made full contact with all of those residents up on that hill. They've also talked about that they need to put plans together on how they're going to get down off of that hill or go up to the skyline side wherever they're located at. So yes, there are plans and suggestions to all those homeowners up there. And they've actually met with them, and they usually meet with them usually on a yearly basis to talk about that.
Okay, thanks. And then on the visual inspection, you said it was once a year around fire season, that there was an inspection of the growth around the poles. I take it. When what are we considering the beginning of fire season, or when are those inspections taking place right now?
Typically, they need to be completed by May every year. And then again in like November, right before like the windy season and that dry windy season that we get towards the end of the year sometimes.
Okay, so it's actually twice a year. Oh, great. Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you so much. Do we
Anything
need
else?
to? Sorry, I'm really off today. Okay, so we need to have a motion to accept and approve the wildfire mitigation plan as presented. Anybody move? In a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think because we're required to take one and we're a little ahead of schedule, we'll take a 10-minute break here and let any public who's trying to participate in the next one, give them a little chance to join. So why don't we come back, make it 15 minutes and be back at 7:10. to item 4, which is a discussion on grid modernization. Are there any public comments?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 4, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. Just refresh this really quick. No hands raised. No.
Thank you. Do we have a presentation?
Yeah, we do. Tom Marshall, Assistant Director, Utilities, Electric Engineering and Operations. And we're going to do a quick presentation and open up to your questions. We have been working on a plan for the modernization. And can you go ahead and go to the first slide, please? Thank you. So we've done a analysis report we did through a consulting firm, and we came up, we've moved from a number of about 3 kVA per home to 6 kVA per home with electrification in the homes. And this is assuming diversification in the loads. So if you look at the loads that we have on the system, we can have a lot of customers that accumulate 3 kVA. At any period in time, they might be more or less, but when we aggregate all of that together, it typically comes out today about 3 kVA, and we're expecting it to be about 6 kVA in the future. Most of these capacity increases that we're going to see have impact on our distribution transformers and our secondary conductors. And that's mainly the area we're going to be focusing on is installing more transformers and more secondary networks out in our out in the residential areas of town. I will say that this electrification we're talking about here is mainly for the residential sector. That's where we're seeing the most impacts from electrification today. One of the other things
Just a quick clarification question. The 6 kVA is expected to be a steady state peak, or is that is there a time frame over which this would hit?
So this is a demand. It's not as demand is varies over the day.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So when we're looking at it, we're expecting sort of the peak demand to be the sum of 6 kVA per home.
Yep.
But in reality, people have electric chargers. They have multiple electric chargers. It could be 16 kVA at one period of time or something else.
Yeah. Okay. So understand that. My question is, what is the time of transition from 3 kVA to 6 kVA that you're assuming in here? And do you ever expect the long-term average to go above 6 kVA?
So at this point, we're thinking this is about where it's going to end up, sort of based on the climate zone we're in here and diversification that we see today. I mean, there are some new factors in that with electric vehicle charging, but the other kind of loading is more, I mean, it's similar to what we see today, where it is really based on this mild climate we're in, and it gives us lower peaks than you might see in other parts of the country.
And one quick clarification, what do you assume about the growth in the number of households, given that we're supposed to add 6,000 households according to our housing element?
So I think a lot of well, it depends on where the housing comes. So we are looking at, there will be these ADUs coming, but there could be a lot of multi-tenant buildings. Those will require a new service, and will be part of the development project to install a new service, a new transformer for those. So I was just moving on. We were talking about the 12 kV circuit ties. So in our system, we have a 12 kV backbone. As we do electrification, there's going to be need to improve on reliability and resiliency of the network. And part of that's going to be building additional ties within the network so that we can maintain customers when outages occur or we have a failure of a piece of equipment. And then we're going to have some substation transformer upgrades. We are expecting loads to increase, and there's a couple locations in the city that we're going to have to add transformer capability in the substation. That's going to be later it's going to be later in our upgrade. That's going to happen. It's not really necessarily the beginning. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. Right now, the estimated cost is somewhere between 220 and $306 million. The high number is probably not going to happen. That's just sort of an outlier depending on the choices we make in terms of the upgrades that are made. So the other things we're looking at technologies to reduce coincident loading. There are in development today. A lot of it is getting ready to come to market. So we are going to be looking at as we move into the upgrade, we'll be looking at this technology that comes in and make determinations in places where we may be able to reduce the upgrades based on some of this technology that may come into the market. One of the things we need to do on this peak load mitigation technologies, we need to take a look at it and see if it may be cheaper in the long run for us just to upgrade the network itself and not implement the mitigation technology. So we have to look at that and say, we have to put it in, but it may be a very complicated computer control system we have to put in place, and we'll have to weigh that against just upgrading the network. So that will be something we will look at. And as I mentioned before, as the technologies develop, we'll be looking at them to see if we can implement them into the network as we go. So I've sort of laid out, this is sort of our thinking on how the pieces of modernization. So today we have some 4 kV still in our network. And first thing we're going to do is try to get most of that converted to 12 kV. The reason we're converting it is the primary network is going to be overloaded if we keep it at 4 kV. So we're going to go ahead and make that change to move it to a 12 kV network. Where we need to, we're going to increase overhead and system capacity. They'll mainly be in ties between circuits. And then we're going to convert the underground systems to 4 to 12 kV. That's going to be later in the process. Just going back to the overhead piece, the reason we're attacking that first is probably about, 60 to 70% of all customers are connected to the overhead system. So we're looking at getting that done as soon as possible so that customers won't be restricted by the capacity of the existing network. Back to the underground. So I talked about 4 to 12 kV, and then we would then upgrade the underground system capacity where we need it. I'll just say that's much bigger problem than the overhead. It's much more complex, and it takes a lot more interaction with neighborhoods to get that completed because we have to install new equipment on pad mounted equipment and things in neighborhoods, and it's more difficult to do. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to increase the substation capacity, and I mentioned before the technologies to reduce the peak load and improve reliability.
Can I ask one question? Are there any systems right now that are 12 kV?
Yes. So majority of our system is 12 kV. We have really the area around off of Embarcadero between University up in there, and down to Rinconada Park, that's all 4 kV, that whole section in there. So that's probably the main 4 kV we have. We have a little bit of 4 kV over by East Meadow in there. That's a small patch. We've almost completed that conversion. It's in the area with the circles. Yeah, that's 4 kV right now. And that we're in the process of converting it right today.
So the 60 to 70% of customers that are overhead, is that 60 to 70% of the 4 kV customers or all customers?
All customers. Yeah. So I'll go through sort of the tasks that we're looking at right now. So today we're working on a trial upgrade project. It's in the Leland Manor area, and that's one of those 4 kV sections. And we're doing a project. We've already done some work in that area to make the conversion from 4 to 12 kV. As we mentioned before, we're designing for the 6 kVA per home right now. We've already started. One of the things that's limiting us on what we can do right now is availability of some materials, one of them being transformers. We have made progress in figuring out how to get those to us probably later this year. A lot of it's coming from foreign suppliers now for transformers. So we talked about upgrading the overhead system. So we're going to be, again, as we mentioned before, we're replacing the transformers and upgrading the secondary systems. And it's an upgrade to the residential circuits. We're going to reduce, the purpose of this, again, is to reduce the barriers limiting people on electrification projects. We do run into this today. We have people coming in asking for certain multiple batteries or large solar panels coming on their homes. And today we have to limit the size of them just because of the networks out there, because we can't go out and rebuild it all today. So this is going to reduce each project that we just aren't going to be able to accommodate. But there is a way for them to move forward if they want to do that. But it requires them to install additional or pay for additional infrastructure upgrades if they want to do that. As we talked, we've started in 2020. We're expecting to start this around late 2023 in the design. And we expected to go through a design and construction project that runs from 2023 to about 2027 to be done.
That's for all overhead systems?
For all overhead systems. Once we're going to complete that, we're going to start in on the undergrounding systems. And again, because it's the most difficult for us to upgrade because of the need for additional infrastructure. And today we don't install subsurface equipment anymore. So we have to find locations to put pad mounted transformers. And these are very difficult negotiations that have to occur with the neighborhoods to find locations to put the equipment. So we expect this, although it's not a lot, I think we have about 12% of our residential customers underground right now, but I expect that to be probably the most difficult task we have to do.
And some of the underground customers already have pad mounted transformers, right?
And yes, in the newer districts, they all have pad mount transformers. But even in those, if we're doubling the load, we'll have to install new pad mount transformers because we don't have enough capacity on the existing ones. And that's a bigger project. It's not like the overhead where you just, I can just put a transformer on the pole there and split the secondary network. There, we would have to build new infrastructure, which would require us to maybe extend primary conduits and build additional secondary conduits. And it's just a much more complicated and expensive part of the work. A lot of that area is the Crescent Park area. That's a very old underground district at 4 kV. That will have to be completely rebuilt as we go through this process.
I had a question too. With the bigger transformers, is there any, when you talk about having to deal with the neighbors and everything, is there any sound that comes from it or environmental impact that people are concerned about with the higher voltage?
Well, yeah, I don't know that we're going to have a lot of larger transformers. We're probably going to have more. And is there noise from them? Yes, there is. They tend to hum at 120 hertz. And so that's, one of the things where we're in a little bit area of compromise, because when we typically bid out transformers, we have specifications that we follow in terms of efficiency and noise. In the market conditions we are right now, we have to get whatever we can find in the marketplace. So some of those things we are not evaluating like we normally would in the past. I'm hopeful by the time we get into rebuilding these underground systems, we'll be able to get the types of transformers we'd like to have brought into the system. Okay, this we expect to start some of the underground in around 2026 with the design, and we're looking to be done around 2030 with that. So on the substations and circuits, we're going to add capacity to this I think we're looking now at 2 substations, Colorado and our Hopkins substation, to add some larger transformers in there. Right now, they're relatively small substation transformers, and we're going to increase the size of those. we may be able to relocate some transformers from the business park that may be coming out as part of our Tesla project that we're working on. For that, design and construction in late 2027, and we want to be done with the substations and the circuits in 2030.
Just a quick question. Why are we postponing the upgrading the underground systems until starting in 2026? Why not start sooner?
Because we're going to be focusing on the overhead systems at that time.
Oh, it's a manpower.
Well, it's a
concern, or-
manpower, but I think it's also just, how much we can manage in terms of construction management. I mean, these are huge construction projects.
So it's a managerial limitation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, although, we're going to hire people to help manage too, but we still have to have staff looking at some staff somewhere looking over their shoulder. So that's where some of the limitations.
But technically it would be feasible to do if you had the management / staff resources.
I think it would be a lot. And I would just say just the disruption in the community too. I think we have to think about that as well, of how many areas are we really disrupting in the community all at the same time. So I think it would be difficult to do it all at the same time, even with additional staff. It's just a lot that has to be managed.
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do the overhead first, and then we do the underground, and then our intention is eventually to have everything underground, can you use those? No?
No. And I guess we'll be back probably on the subject of undergrounding at some point. So our SCAP goal is to be pretty much in place by 2030 with these upgrades for electrification. The undergrounding is really a little bit different subject. That is a very large, excuse me, a very large project that the council's looked at many times. Since I've been here, probably 3 times they've looked at the issue of undergrounding. And there's just some issues with participation of the telephone and cable companies and working with the city on the undergrounding. And then there's the costs that go along with it. And I don't know what the numbers are right now. I would guess it's, probably $400 or $500 million to complete undergrounding. Another $400 or $500 million. And I don't quote that. I'm just sort of putting the number out there. It's just a large number.
So are we kind of assuming, I had just read, I don't know what report it was on the capital projects that had a lot of undergrounding on it. So I just assumed from that we have been doing it. But I guess the question is, when you put them in overground, is that a certain type of transformer that you then cannot put underground? Like you can't use it on the pad mounted or whatever?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't want to get too much into the undergrounding, but I think we'll be back on that subject to cover that. This question comes up a lot. It's come up a lot over the years. And, the council time to time has to make a decision on what path they want to go down to. We'll come back and inform you sort of what the issues are at some later date. And then we've already talked about load mitigation. We're going to be looking at that from the beginning to see what we can find in the marketplace that will help us with mitigating some of the load and maybe reducing some of our costs for the upgrades. This just shows the timeline of what we've been thinking about. Any questions on that?
How much would individual customer behavior change what we need to do? So if we had more solar panels, I don't know if that's, if it's a positive or a negative, or more storage, or once we have AMI, if we can shift when the load is peaking or the peak of the load.
Yeah, and I think all those things are sort of meld together. There's always going to be a limit of how much, say, solar or how many batteries can be connected to the system. We're trying to put a reasonable amount of capacity out there to take care of what most customers will want. There will always be some outliers that are asking for, very large systems that we may not be able to accommodate with this upgrade. But as I mentioned before, if they choose to do that, there is a pathway to get it done for them. It's just going to have some additional costs for infrastructure upgrades that they would have to pay.
And the reason for not starting the load mitigation technologies until 2024 is because the AMI installation is not complete until the end of this year.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct. That's part of it. And, I think, is AMI going to be delayed or where are we?
Yeah, I think our initial goals were that we were going to have deployed everywhere with AMI by the end of the year, but we're still having difficulties getting meters. And so I think what's going to happen, it's going to get pushed into the first quarter of 24. So we're going to probably be about 4 months, just because of demand for the meters themselves. Yeah. It's electric meters.
Mm-hmm.
I think, manufacturers are having a hard time delivering meters right now. So.
Can I ask a question about the pilot project?
Yes.
So we kind of went by it quickly and I haven't really known very much about it before, but when that project gets done, would you say that is it basically everything that needs to be done to upgrade a neighborhood? So at the time that pilot project is done, those people in that neighborhood can go ahead and electrify to their heart's content? Is that the goal? Is it they will be set?
Correct. At that point, we would have sort of the capacity out there that we think is a reasonable amount of capacity put on the system for people to install solar and batteries on their home.
Okay. And then do we have like does part of the project include, once that's done, kind of we'll communicate with those customers and try to encourage them? Is there like programming that we foresee doing to try to kind of move the people who are ready to be moved onto more electricity, trying to get them to do that?
Yeah, we, excuse me, we will be coordinating with our resource planning division who handles sort of the promotion and incentives out there as we get that together. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about the funding. So we do have the money in the budget at this today. I don't know how much of the actual the decision on whether we need like revenue bonds to supplement that. I think we're still looking at that. And the other part of that is we've submitted for a matching DOE Grid Resiliency Innovation Partnership or grant. We made it through the first screening and we did a final submittal, and we're looking for something late this year, probably letting us know whether we're going to get funding for that and how much funding that might be. So. And then, we have to make a decision on revenue bonds. So part of that's dependent on how much we get from DOE. So if we don't get money there, we may have to go then get revenue bonds to help support this infrastructure upgrade. Is there anything else at the end?
Assuming we didn't do this, what would we notice happening and when?
So what begins to happen, and we're seeing a little bit of it already, which is we begin to have transformer failures start. We begin getting complaints from customers on voltage excursions. They're out of range. They see, flickering lights, or they see low voltage at their house. So we are beginning to see some of that. We see a few transformer failures starting. We're sort of in the beginning stages of it. There's been actually quite a bit of, vehicle charging in Palo Alto has a large number of chargers. We haven't seen a huge number of batteries, but that's almost every solar project now is including batteries. And that's another stressor on secondary networks, which leads to voltage problems. So one of the things we're doing when, we get these battery project, we review them for the effects on voltage on the secondary network. And it's not, it's for that customer too, but it affects all the other adjacent customers. So we have to look at each one of those. A lot of the times people can come in with large projects, come in with 2 or 3 batteries. The existing network out at the end of the runs cannot handle that additional load from those batteries. So you might ask, well, why are you worried about load from batteries? Well, sometimes they can and sometimes charge off the network. So we have to be able to supply them when they charge off the network.
So you're saying what we would see would be increasing voltage excursions and
correct
transformer failures that would lead to outages?
Outages. Yeah. I mean, voltage excursions don't really lead to outages, but they end up in customer complaints about.
And so what would happen is these would get worse and worse, and there would get lots of complaints. So I'm very much ahead of a supporter of getting ahead of this. I am concerned that there's a lot of energy put into people thinking about the infrastructure. They're expecting a lot from the infrastructure update. And what I'm seeing is mostly going to a 12 kVA house and doing 12 kV. Will that enable all the things? I mean, people are talking about, will it enable selling into the grid from your Tesla battery at certain times? Will it enable state-of-the-art demand-side management capabilities? Again, assuming we have AMI, so we can see this. Will that be enabled, or are those separate projects? Or
so, I mean, I think they're related and connected. So at this point, like you said, I mean, the infrastructure is an important thing because we are going to see an increase in loading on the system, and we have to accommodate in that some way. But as part of that, there's going to be a whole new set of technologies out there that will allow, like you say, you can, possibly send battery power back into the grid. That could be something that you could do. And, you could get sophisticated at some point, and you can monitor and control transformer loading by controlling loading at home, possibly in the future. And I think all these things are coming. I think a lot of this is not quite ready for prime time today. I mean, I've seen the CEC, they talked about vehicle to the grid, that even they said it's not quite ready. But so the issue we're kind of dealing with is we're on a timeline. The city wants to be done by 2030, but not all the technologies that might be in place are there today. So we have to start, otherwise we're not going to get there. But as we move along, if it turns out this technology's available and we can use it, we can implement it down the road as we go.
Commissioner Forcell, then Commissioner Metz. Just continuing on that theme, can you say more about the assumptions or sort of design constraints that went into getting to the 6 kVA per home number?
So, yeah, so I think, a 6 kVA is analysis. They did take a look at a large study that was done by LADWP in terms of loading to figure out what impacts of electrification. And that's number we have is similar to the number they came up into a large study. So we relied heavily on their data because they have a lot of data. The city of Palo Alto has very little data because we don't have any recording meters. But what we did look at is we looked at where our loads were today, looked at what's going to be installed in the homes, and then calculated what we thought would be a reasonable diversified load we're going to see with electrification based on the loads that are going to be installed in the homes.
So is just modeling out this many refrigerators and this many heat pumps and this many
Correct.
Electric vehicle chargers charging based on this many miles a day of commute, ba-doop,
Right.
and that sort of rolls up into what were the sort of assumptions with the biggest uncertainty?
So in terms of, I mean, I would say the biggest sort of uncertainty is electric vehicle charging is probably the largest uncertainty out there. What does that look like? And then, you know, as the question we talked about technology. So how do we incent and use time of use metering or whatever to adjust when people charge? So those are all going to have to come in play down the road as we go through the upgrade. So we didn't discount that. I mean, this number that we're coming isn't going to allow everybody to turn their charger on all at the same time. It's just not going to be feasible. So
there's a leap of faith or an assumption that, for example, will be what by the time there's a vast adoption of electric vehicles with the associated charging that the utility or the city will be able to manage that load somehow.
Right, or we'll have a better idea what that load actually looks like when people actually are doing it.
Right. Right. And so let's see, I have a question about, there was a member of the community that emailed, I think, a few staff people as well as the UAC about a 20 kVA limit on something. Can you talk a little bit about that? I wasn't familiar with it.
Sure, I can talk on that. So that is our, it's been our limit for 20 years for generation on the system. It's 20 kVA or kW. That's the maximum we allow on a shared distribution network, which means one transformer with a secondary network with multiple, maybe 10, 15 homes on it. Maximum we'll allow is 20 kVA. But if they choose, they want to do it more than 20 kVA, that's where it gets into what I talked about before. Then you can do it, you can continue to do it, but you have to pay the system upgrades to allow you to get your own transformer serving your house if you go beyond that limit.
And is that one of those things? It's 20 kVA for the 10 or 15 homes served by that?
No,
it's
it
just
depends. I'm just mentioning, it's if one customer comes in and asks for 20 kVA. I mean, most transformers we have out there are like 25, 37 and a half. Maybe we have a
I was just getting at, is it in the aggregate? So if there were like a customer that already had a 5 kilowatt system and another one had a 5 kilowatt system?
No,
that's not how it works.
Aggregate. It's one customer coming in and asking for 20.
Got it. Okay. And can we use kVA and kilowatt interchangeably for the purposes of this conversation? Okay.
Works for me.
And is that the nameplate rating of the system or the sort of expected power output?
The KVA or?
Well, the 20 kVA limit.
So the 20 limit is to, so there's a bunch of other issues when a large generator goes on the system, if it's more than 20 kVA. So we have the issue of the transformer and there's voltage, again, voltage issues. We keep talking about that, but it causes voltage issues when I have a large generator on the system, maybe coming on and off, and then we're seeing voltage deviations all over the place. So that's why that limit sort of exists out there. If it's distributed, they're coming off at different times, so we don't end up with the same kind of issues.
Got it. Switching gears a little bit, you alluded to, when talking about underground systems, I'm trying to, the language you used was difficult negotiations with neighborhoods.
Yes.
And I think, I guess Chair Siegel and I might be the only commissioners who were around for a set of difficult negotiations with a neighborhood that was supposed to be upgraded with pad-mounted transformers.
Correct.
And the last time I chatted with Director Batchelor, this is unresolved many years later. So I guess my question is staff looking at, like, does it have to be a negotiation? Are there, are there policies that council could adopt that would make it be less complex?
Well, so I guess
you might not be the right person to ask about that.
I know. I think I can answer the question. So the issue is, I mean, does the city usually have sufficient right of way where I could stick a transformer near somebody's front yard? We do. In most cases, we can just say, we're going to come in, we're putting the transformer here, but I can, that's not going to go well if we do that. So, I think it's going to be something we're going to have to deal with. And that's why we need a little time on this underground to figure out sort of what policy is going to be in place and how flexible we're going to be in terms of when we get opposition to something. Are we going to go negotiate with another? Are we going to try to negotiate, or are we just going to say, yeah, it's got to go here? And so that's, we got to think about that when we get to it. We don't want to be in a public relations nightmare with our customers out there either. So there's a balance that we have to do on that.
I will say my memory from the last go around that the UAC was involved in, I don't think we did a very good job giving policy advice at the time, but maybe we can be more helpful this time if that's something that staff wants to bring to the commission.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think it's like Tom said. I think the thing is that we actually have to take a step further than what the policy is that council has adopted. The policy, as we've mentioned with this, was, everything was going to be pad mounted transformers. There was no ands, ifs, and we were not going to put any more underground. And if you remember, those transformers are in the underground section, and we needed to move them up. And as you well know, we got a lot of pushback from the community in that area about now they have to see this green box that's going to be in their front yards. And as Tom mentioned, is that, yes, we could force our hands, but I'm not sure if that's really the best thing we want to do. And I think we'll have to bring that back to you to look at from a policy standpoint, and then also then go to council to get approval portions of it and see what their feelings would be about how we move forward with this. And I think that, as Tom mentioned, that's one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with when we start looking at the undergrounding. And it makes more sense because the majority of our customers are in the overhead sections right now. And it'll give us a little bit of time to figure out a situation or a solution for this pad mounted situation that we'll have to do. Because as Tom mentioned is, we're almost going to have to double the amount of transformers that we have. So what you see now in someone's backyard, or even a pad mounted transformer, there may be 3 more transformers that'll have to be put into that community. And who's going to be the lucky one that's going to have to see the box now all of a sudden? So I think it's going to be some long conversations, and we're going to have to work through that with all of you as well as then with the council.
Commissioner Metz.
I will, first of all, thank you for taking this up. Really important for SCAP and everything else, keeping the lights on. I had some questions along the lines of Commissioner Phillips' questions. The plan seems mostly about increasing capacity, right? I mean, that's really what we've talked about, and doesn't seem to address, what you could call grid of the future kind of issues like EVs and demand management and distributed resources and all that sort of stuff, which may or may not happen, which, I think you characterize as not ready for prime time, which, perhaps is true, but EVs for one, certainly seem to say 10 years from now are going to be ubiquitous, right? And the two-way charging of EVs, which have large batteries, 70, kilowatt hour batteries or such, seem like are going to have an impact. And it seems that, most of the discussion that we have here in the electricity sector is about decisions that were made decades ago, which when they were made were, good decisions, but the world has changed. And here we are trying to deal with those decisions. And it seems like that's going to happen here too. And I sort of feel like there just isn't enough information here, at least for me personally, to fulfill an advisory role in regards to those kinds of issues. And, so I wonder, will there be a plan, like you referenced electric utility analysis report? Could we see that? Would that help us to understand what the plan is? Will there be a plan which has, it's a lot of money. It's we're talking about $200 or $300 million. Will there be a plan with enough detail for us to understand, what's planned in these areas? So I think that's my main question.
So
Will there be is there a plan, or will there be a plan as we begin spending this money, and
so
how's that all planned?
So, I mean, there is, and I didn't mention in the present, we are doing a study on technology too. That's in progress right now with a consultant. We will be getting that. I hope, later this year, we'll get that back. So in terms of, concerns about whether we'll be able to accept, delivery from customers back into the system, those are all part of what we're planning to do. And they're coming along with the infrastructure upgrades. So things like looking at our substation controls and making sure that we can take reverse power flow through our substations, or identifying areas where we might see reverse power flow. We are looking at that. That's going to be part of the upgrade plan, is to be ready to take that. In terms of solar panels, I mean, all the new solar inverters have communications. When the capabilities out there that we can communicate and control those inverters, that will be another topic that we will be looking at. So all those things are going to be part of the grid modernization. On top of that, when we've talked about, and I didn't get in detail here either, on terms of circuit ties, we are looking at putting additional controls, remote control systems out there that allow us to switch remotely. We're looking at putting a fiber network in. It's part of the fiber rollout for fiber to the home. There's a section of that that's set aside for utility fiber for automation purposes. So we're looking at that as well. The intent of all that obviously is to increase reliability and resiliency. We're trying to get better sectionalizing and smaller outages. So, I mean, that's all sort of part of it, but that's coming sort of in the next study part, but it's not being ignored in terms of the dollar values. But in general, the major dollars that we're looking at right now are these infrastructure upgrades. And I do believe, irrespective of, the technologies come out, we're going to see increases in load on the system that we're going to have to cope with. And I think that's what we're trying to get ahead of right now.
Okay. Well, when will this commission see, because what you just described sounds important, but I didn't see any of that in the report or the last report on this topic. And so it's, for us to fulfill our advisory role, we need to have some of the details of what's planned in front of us.
Yeah, so I'll just say that that's something that's going to be coming. Laying out here is what we're applying for in our federal grant application. So we're sharing that with you today, what we've applied for.
Right.
But there will be additional details as those get worked out, as we get the additional study work coming back. So that's what I will tell you at this point.
I can also add that too, is that, Commissioner, that through the SCAP efforts that are going on, as you well know, that this past Monday, the SCAP plan and was approved by the council. And part of that is that to look at the reliability and resiliency through a strategic plan that they are working on now with the SCAP group. And Jonathan Abendschein is heading that effort in that portion of it. And so I don't have a date when that plan will actually be put in place, the strategic plan, but it's going to be something that we can share with the UAC. And I can get a little bit more specific on the date timeframes that we can share that with you, as what our findings are on that as well.
Okay, well, I would appreciate that because I've received questions actually from City Council, which sort of implied that they think SCAP is in our lap, and that was not my understanding. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that Chair Burt, that oversees the SCAP committee portion of it, he had made comments about that he's looking at the resiliency piece in this SCAP. He's, and he also sits as the chair on the finances. We went through this plan to talk about, we thought a good estimate would be around that $300 million mark. And there's $25 million, as all of you know, are in this year's budget coming in 24 to start looking at doing this design and looking at these studies. And then, as Tom mentioned, is getting equipment so that we can convert some of these areas. And I think the thing is that, he has asked the questions as well around, what's that grid going to look like? And we talked about it, that it's going to have to be in the strategic plan portion as we move forward. So I know that he's been asking myself and others, what is that going to really look like, other than just, as you mentioned, is that we're just adding capacity to the system itself.
Right. So, I guess what I would like to suggest, in order to keep everybody's on the same page, would be that this commission consider a subcommittee that would address this. This topic, the grid modernization, is gigantic capital project. It's, as Mr. Marshall talked about, central to the SCAP program for the city. So I think it's, sufficiently big and important that it would warrant something like that. I would suggest that, having been on the subcommittee for fiber, I found that was an efficient way to work and to get stuff done, and also keep people informed in ways that's not really possible in a monthly commission meeting. So I just like to suggest that for the commission.
I guess I need to think a little bit more about that, because I need to have a conversation with Brad Eggleston, who is the Public Works Director, to talk about a little bit, because I think the thing is that in this project, that what you're asking for is that there's more to it than just this grid modernization from a city's perspective when we look at the SCAP. And I think a lot of that is being pushed by the SCAP and through the plans that they've been approved by the council. And I don't know if we will be stepping in the wrong direction with the direction that the council's given. If we formed a committee just around this project itself, even though that we derive this from a utilities perspective, but it's also encompassed in the bigger picture of the whole SCAP. It's just like, heat pump water heaters. It's a program that is really basically being funded out of the utility side. As we move forward into more rebates and things that we'll look at, I'm sure that there'll be higher some rebates for chargers. And there will be probably a rebate for induction. So the thing is that it's a lot bigger picture than just this dealing with this grid modernization portion of it. So before I'd say yes, that we should have a committee, I would ask that we can have more of a conversation about this at the next meeting, and I get a chance to talk a little bit more about to Brad himself, who is overseeing the SCAP. And see what the thoughts are, and have some conversations with Pat as well too.
Yeah, I think actually that's a really good point. And, maybe what would make sense would be to start off with some kind of study session, around the whole picture of SCAP and grid modernization, because SCAP is, of course, a big city initiative, but it doesn't happen without grid modernization. So having something like a study session, perhaps with city council, if they would want to do that, and then give everybody the marching orders, and this is what's in this bucket, this is what's in that bucket. I think that could be a good way to get started in an efficient way and make sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing.
I can just throw in one thought, which I think that last line is maybe the most important, is that everyone knows what everyone is doing. And so there are different mechanisms to make that happen. In the past, I think we had UAC members who attended SCAP subcommittee meetings, and that changed when we had the changeover in city council, and maybe that's something else to consider, or sometimes attend or something. But I think what we're hearing and feeling is that there's not enough of a full circle communication. It's really both directions. It's what's SCAP thinking, is what we can help guide them, and that should inform them for future. And I appreciate that. Vice Director Abendschein knows a lot of that. And so he's certainly, the linchpin who can bring that information back and forth, but it's helpful for us to know that. And I would hope that we can also be of help to the SCAP and City Council. And did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think the questions from the commissioners, I think, are right on point in terms of the evaluation of the grid upgrade and where we have to go beyond that. One of the questions that I had the other night for Mr. Ellsheim at the SCAP meeting was about these budget situations, because it's a lot of money and we got to make sure that it's there because we have to do this. So you have 220 to 306 in the budget. And is that just for infrastructure, just for the kind of items that you discussed?
Correct.
Right. So when we get into things like rebates for water pumps and so on, that's a whole different deal. That's not funded in this number.
Correct.
So talk about being everybody on the same page. We have to keep that in mind as well, because there's a lot of things that we have to do if we want to help people backfill, refurbish their places and become electric instead of gas. So a related question then is, the other question in terms of your budget estimates and your timing, how are you feeling now about labor and supply chain issues for parts?
Well, so we're starting to feel better about it. It seems like some of the supply chain issues are starting to get better. The one thing for us, even though, we're taking for us a very large project, this is not a huge project in terms of, say how many transformers PG&E might be buying on a monthly basis. They, probably within 4 months, they've bought all the transformers we would need for electrification. So I guess the point being, I think we're not buying huge numbers of things, even though it's a huge project for a utility our size, that we should be able to get the things we need from the marketplace. And that's something we're working on right now, is trying to figure out how to get advanced supply chain stuff in place so that we'll be in the queue to buy things. I think the last thing that got thrown in the works is now there's an issue around wood poles, acquiring wood poles, because of some treatment decisions made on what kind of treatment can be used on those poles. And it changed by the EPA, and now poles from Canada we can't get poles from Canada anymore. So now we got the whole supply chain issue with that we're dealing. But I do still feel that by the time we get into the major part of this, a lot of supply chain issues will have resolved, or we will be in the queue to get equipment we need.
So you're not assuming that any of these are constraints in terms of your timeline?
I'm at this point, I don't think it's going to constrain our timeline.
Okay. And then this related question, have you done any, you're projecting various things like the number of EVs that are going to be out there, as one of the commissioners said, a drain on the system. But you also said, to Commissioner Croft, I think, that yes, we'll be able to do anything we want. The question that she asked is, are we going to be ready to go and just kind of do whatever we need to do with the grid? The answer was basically yes. But that's dependent on how many people are doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I mentioned that. I mean, it assumes, I guess, a reasonable amount of things. There's always going to be outliers where somebody's doing something that's, much larger than we can really accommodate.
Right. So my question is, with that new capacity that was described that way, and the budget, have you then done any analysis of, by the end of 2030, let's say, or whatever time, have you done any sort of sensitivity analysis on kind of how many homes will be able to be retrofitted to gas? And so how close we are to that proverbial, when do we turn off the gas date?
So
there are other issues involved in when we turn off the gas date, but I'm just saying, have you looked at, how that's going to kind of pace itself out and where we're going to be by 2030, let's say, to start
So the intent in terms of the infrastructure upgrade is we would be done essentially with the infrastructure upgrade in 2030. Now, how fast that actually takes place and how fast people come off gas and move to other things, that's going to be dependent on
A lot of other issues.
a lot of other issues.
That's right.
That we don't have control over. And we're really sort of approaching this in the way that we don't want to be the limiting factor for people making decisions on whether they can upgrade now or they got some impediment to upgrading. So the intent of this is to get it so essentially, hopefully, everybody can do, I would say a reasonable upgrade where everything can be electric in the home, but it's not going to accommodate, somebody that wants 40 kW of solar panels on their roof.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great, thanks.
Commissioner Croft?
Thanks. Yeah. I actually I kind of wanted to, I have some specific questions and just a general comment, but the question I asked before about that pilot project and when it's done, that neighborhood is free to go. As I look at the Gantt chart, can I assume that kind of that just follows throughout these other projects? So for example, you're going on to upgrading the overhead systems, and that would be done neighborhood by neighborhood, where once it was done, that neighborhood was free to go also?
Correct.
So, okay. And then I guess, I just would like to echo the comments that I'd love to see a plan, because that does feel to me like, has the city chosen neighborhoods? I don't know if that's something the city would be willing to share, but a question I have is just how does the city educate me on how does the city manage the plan? Do you guys have a written plan that these slides are derived out of? And then I'm assuming there's new dynamic information all the time. For example, you're doing this technology assessment that's going to, you're going to have to change the plan based on what you learned. So I'm curious what kind of planning is done on an ongoing basis that the city uses to determine the work, and can we see those?
So, there is not a detailed plan neighborhood by neighborhood at this point. The study we did is to essentially look at the whole system, and we divided it up into what we think were workable sections, a workable number of homes that can be done. But when we actually go out to pick these neighborhoods, some of them, like we mentioned, it's 4 kV. We're going to do that first because we need primary capacity there as well, and we have to convert it to 12 kV to get it. So those will probably be early, but a lot of this is conceptual right now. We also are having to coordinate with the fiber to the home project as well. We don't want to be coming into a neighborhood where 6 months we're in there doing electric, and then we come back 4 months later and pull fiber and disturb everybody again. So we're looking at how we can coordinate those pieces. So there's a lot of moving pieces to actually figuring out where we're going to go and where we would start and what order we go in. But that's something we're just beginning to work on, how we're going to do that. We're sort of jumping into this pilot project to get started and learn from that. And that will inform us a little bit when we create the rest of the plan for the city.
And so is there, just kind of, if I just use an analogy, so on the grade crossings, there's like the 5% plan and then there's the 10% plan. So they get to the point where they're like incrementally, the plan is getting more and more solid. Is there a rough plan that like, for example, so it would be helpful to see, neighborhood 1, even if it's not named, neighborhood 1, neighborhood 2, and other things, like we're going to decide what to do with EVs. I would personally expect that at some point the sustainability plan is going to contain some storage, just so that we're not requiring, as people start using during the winter, during the hours that we're not having a lot of solar or renewables, that we're going to want to mitigate those. And ideally we have some kind of storage means built in the city. So there's I'd just love to see the plan, what does it encompass?
Yeah.
And even if it's high level, and then as it gets more concrete and built out, just be brought along on that process.
Yeah. I would just say, plans at this point are are conceptual because we're at a very early planning stage. So it's, I mean, really what it is, we're looking at converting like a third of the overhead system over a course of three years, and then come back and do the underground and then substation upgrades. And we have, you know, we know where we're going to do substation upgrades, but I can't tell you right now what neighborhoods we're going to start with, other than we have this pilot project that we're looking at right now, and that'll be followed up by other 4 kV overhead neighborhoods, which would be the area over by Hopkins. So those are where we're going to start. And after that, it's going to be based on some coordination efforts we have to do, as I mentioned, with the fiber project that's going to be ongoing at the same time.
Sorry, one more follow-up. Do we use Microsoft Project? Do we use like, is it like, how does it, is that what the project is in right now? It's probably not written, but is it?
It's in Microsoft Project, but it's at a very high level right now. It just talks about, you know, when, you know, how much of the system we're going to convert, how, you know, what, when we need to order materials, when we need to start construction. It's really at that level right now because we haven't picked particular neighborhoods at this point.
Right. Okay, it sounds like there's not something that's appropriate to share with us. Is that beyond?
I mean,
like
I can share what
Yeah.
the other Microsoft plan, but it's not going to be a detailed plan where you're going to look at a map and I can see, I know when my neighborhood is going to be converted. We don't have that plan yet.
I guess I'm not as worried about the neighborhoods. Is just understanding, you know, everything that's included in it right now. And if we should assume that just this, the Gantt chart in here with the subset categories is it, maybe, you know, as we learn more about what's being done in the next month and we hear back from you, we can, I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about the other areas that we'd like to see fleshed out in the plan or just wait for SCAP to come back with more information, for SCAP to be more solidified before we do that. Most of my concern is around the sustainability stuff.
Yeah. So,
and making sure that we're accommodating it.
And I didn't mention this too, is that we're also coordinating with our resource management folks on incentive programs as well. So we have to coordinate sort of what they're doing too. So I think, again, we're in the very early stages of figuring out what we're going to do. And there's going to be eventually be a plan where we're talking about, you know, when we go into neighborhoods and market. So we haven't had those discussions yet. Those will be coming as we get more of the plan fleshed out.
Chair Siegel, may I interrupt for a minute? Can I ask Jonathan Abenchon, who's on the phone, to join us and talk a little bit just unless you would like to go first.
Okay. It seems like this was primarily residentially focused. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there a separate plan for commercially focused or municipally focused loads?
From
And grids?
infrastructure?
Exactly.
Yeah, so we are not expecting a lot of issues in the most of the commercial sector with these infrastructure upgrades. There may be some in the smaller commercial, but most of the larger buildings and things, we're not expecting a huge impact. The biggest that we may see is electric vehicle charging, maybe mass electric vehicle charging in the business park. But in general, we have plenty of transformer capacity there to cover those. They may have to install a transformer, but there's enough capacity in the network to handle that.
And then did I also catch it correctly that it seems like most of our issues are at sort of the far nodes of the system. They're not in the system writ large right now.
Yeah, so the backbone portion of the system, which is it's the 4 and the 12 kV, that's in good shape. I mean, there's a few places where we're going to have to do some work, but we're not seeing a massive amount of work needed on the primary portion of the system.
Okay.
It's mainly just in the secondary network, which is the 120, 240 that comes in your home. That's where most of the work is. Okay.
And do you expect to need upgrades on the primary network at any point in time to meet SCAP requirements, or is that a secondary phase?
So it would be included as we rebuild these circuits. If we need any capacity, we'll be looking at additional capacity if needed. And then I mentioned before about resiliency and reliability, we will be looking at circuit ties and figuring out where we need additional circuit ties to provide better reliability or better resiliency. And that will be included that's included in these costs as well.
Oh, okay. So those upgrades are already included in these costs. Okay, great. Thank you.
Jonathan, are you there? Yeah,
I'm here.
thanks. Do you want to talk a little bit just around, just a real brief update around just the SCAP and just around the strategic plan around the resiliency and reliability piece?
Yeah, so there's a reliability and resiliency strategic plan that we put in the SCAP work plan. This is implementing the direction from council to have the SCAP committee consider reliability in the context of the SCAP and the grid upgrades that are needed. So the study that Tom described earlier is one major part of that strategic plan. And we have some preliminary guidelines for the study that were approved by council on Monday as an appendix to the work plan. And I expect that we'll talk with the SCAP committee in the coming months about any other priorities that they have for that plan. And then we'll get someone on board. It will probably be multiple consultants for different types of work, along with some in-house staff work, to start answering some of the types of questions that the UAC is talking about. And as Dean said, we'll have some conversations with Brad Eggleston, who is the executive lead on the SCAP overall, to talk about the connections between the SCAP committee's work and then the UAC's work, because I know that there's a lot of interest in all the different dimensions of new technologies and their impacts and benefits and opportunities for the grid. But I would, as a starting point, maybe we can share those policy guidelines that are embedded in the work plan that was adopted Monday with the UAC, so you have a sense of generally where that study's going, and we can get some feedback on that.
Can you just clarify what study that is? That's a reliability study?
Reliability and resiliency strategic plan.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think you can see us nodding, but we would appreciate having that shared with us.
Of course.
Any other questions while we have Jonathan on that? Great. And did you have more follow-up questions? I sort of cut you off before.
Yes, but not for Jonathan.
Right. I think that's everything for you. We'd love to see that plan sooner rather than later.
Sounds
and also,
good.
and I guess food for thought is how we can be best supporting the SCAP policies. And, the more we can plan ahead, obviously that's better for everyone. So the more we can participate and be informed. So both directions.
Yeah, I hear loud and clear the desire for more information on the status and direction of the SCAP. So I can talk with Dean about how to get that to you folks.
Do we have regular updates from SCAP to this committee? I mean, would it be something that we could do to have periodic, SCAP or just SCAP present to us when there's updates on which elements of the SCAP plan are relevant to utilities?
Do you have a thought on that? Jonathan?
Yeah, I'd be willing to come with a regular update on SCAP, with SCAP status updates.
Just to be clear, though, that would be welcome. But I think there was a sense before you got on the meeting that there was a request for more detail about the grid modernization plan.
Right, and I'll defer to Tom Marshall. I think Tom spoke to some of those questions, and I'll defer to Tom Marshall on that.
Okay.
Question?
Well, I mean, this is the second time you've been in front of us on this plan, and we haven't seen anything except for your presentation. And I think that's where maybe some of the concern, frustration, I don't want to put words in commissioners' mouths, but interest to see something. If the hesitancy is around customers starting to worry whether they're getting the attention they think they deserve and in what time, I don't think we're asking for that. I don't think anyone's right now thinking about that level of granularity, but just that comfort and understanding of what needs to be done, how we're going to get to where we need to get to. Is that a fair?
Right. I mean, to me, it's simply our role as advisory is to advise city council, and I don't feel comfortable being able to do that with the level of information that we have.
I guess I'm kind of lost in the conversation at this point because I'm not really clear on what you're asking for this plan. I mean, it's an operational plan that all the lines need to be upgraded at this period of time. It's going to be transformers that are going to be going into neighbors' backyards to the front yards. New transformers are going to have to be put in larger sizes, or we're going to have to replace some of these other, we're going to have to add transformers in neighborhoods. And I guess the thing is that, as Tom mentioned, is that, the idea was that we need to start with the 4 kV system, as he mentioned in length here tonight, that that's where we needed to start. And we need to look at some upgrades in our substations. And then, but the entire system is going to have to be touched on the secondary side, not so much on the primary side, but as mentioned, Tom mentioned that we'll be looking at that if we need to increase size of wire or whatever needs to be done at that pole side at that period of time. And so I guess, how do I put that into a plan to give to you that you will be satisfied? I mean, I think the thing is that if we gave you the whole entire map of the entire distribution system and we squared it out and said, okay, well, we think that we're going to be going in this direction, that's not really a plan. So I'm kind of lost of what the specifics that you're asking for. I mean, if it's a handwritten plan, I'm not sure that, as I mentioned last month, the Commissioner Metz was, I'm not going to, I don't have that right now, and I can't share that right now because it's not really feasible. Because when we hire a consultant and we do design, it's kind of really pretty much like we talked about in the past with the fiber design, is that they went out, they looked at all the poles, they looked at all the paths, and fiber is going to be put into neighborhoods throughout the city at that point, and the backbone would be built. And, we didn't really share what that plan looked like or where we're going to start or what poles are going to be touched. So I guess maybe it's just my mind, but I'm just being so narrow-minded on this that I'm trying to understand what you're asking for. And if it's some detailed report that's telling you more than what our presentation was tonight or last time, it's going to be a pretty short report.
Okay. I think, at least for me, the discussion tonight, and I guess the last time, was about growing capacity on the grid. And if you're saying that that's the only issue there is to grid modernization, write that down and say that. From my own background, I don't think that's the case. And Commissioner Phillips, for example, asked, will the grid enable EV charging, for example? So I think this is a very long-term plan and it's a lot of money. So I think it needs to address issues like that and take a position that, demand management's not going to happen, or it's going to happen, and here's what we're doing about it. And EV charging, bidirectional EV charging, is not going to be a factor for X years. And when it is a factor, here's what we're going to do about it, and so on. I think there's a lot of evidence that the grid of the future, particularly if we're talking about a long time, 10 years plus down the road, which with the capital equipment that you're talking about buying, we hope will be around much longer than that, that we need to be able to address those issues explicitly, at minimum saying, we don't think this one's going to matter and this one will matter and here's what we're doing about it. So I think, at least that, for me personally, that's what we're asking. Our responsibility is to advise city council. And I just feel if I'm asked by city council, okay, what's grid modernization doing about EV charging in 2035? I wouldn't be able to give them an answer. So I think we should be able to. I think we should be able to say, don't worry, it's not important, or it is important and they've thought about it and here's what they're doing about it.
So I guess what I'd say, that's the part that's coming. That's the SCAP plan with resiliency plan that's looking at those issues. Now, that doesn't mean we're not considering it as we're going through this plan. We are, but it's going to be also based on, input from the SCAP committee, what we present to them, and what they, areas that feel important. And from our standpoint, whether it's technologically feasible, does it make sense? Do we make some other decisions?
Exactly. I mean,
it's like things are coming.
It's like the world's funniest joke, and nobody can know more than one word of it, right? Or they die laughing. The SCAP people don't understand the technical details of if you have a lot of bidirectional EV charging, what the impact will be. You have the folks who have the skill to be able to answer that kind of question.
Right. And we are looking at those issues. I want to assure you that we are looking at them, but we're not through with a whole plan on what the future looks like. And in a lot of ways, the future is uncertain in a lot of these areas, and it is developing. And I think this is going to be a very fluid process when we're making decisions as we go through. The issue, I guess I keep coming back to it, but if we don't get started on the infrastructure today, it's not going to matter if you have those technologies, because we're not going to have the capacity out there to even deal with it. So, we're in the very early stages. I mean, we're going to be scrambling to do a plan. This is a huge plan that has to be executed, but we got to start now. It's going to take, till 2030 at least to get this done. And it's going to be piece by piece, but I got to start now. I got to get part of it done. Then these other technologies are going to come in and it's going to change. It could very well change what we do later on. Again, we're not committing today to spend the whole amount. It's just the first sort of stage of what we put out there. That's what we're going to be doing now. We're going to be looking at it and see what the results of what we did. We're going to be looking to see when we electrify in those areas, what happens when we electrify? Does the load come to the place we think it is? We don't really know now, because there really isn't a good example of what happens when you electrify 100% of the homes in Palo Alto. What happens? We don't really know. So we're sort of moving in steps. The first step is to run this trial and see what the results are. And then we'll adjust the plan as we go. And I think that's, I can understand your frustration and that there's not a plan laying it all out, but the reality is there isn't a single path to go down right now. It's multiple paths, multiple technology, multiple decision points we're going to have to make as we move through this project.
Yeah, Commissioner, I just really want to echo what Assistant Director Marshall said about this plan coming in phases and about the need to move quickly. I think one of the things that we recognize, and I just want to emphasize that the SCAP team is working hand in hand with the engineering team. We're meeting weekly on issues behind the scenes around programs, around strategic planning efforts. But I think what we recognized early on was that if we wanted people making emissions reductions tomorrow, we needed to get started on these grid capacity upgrades and get the reliability and resiliency work coming in a second phase after that on a quick enough timeline that if there's anything that affects if there are any benefits that we can see from new technologies that could help us maybe save money on the grid upgrades, and we can incorporate those as we go. But one thing that I asked Tom early on was, is there anything about the way that we're planning to build these capacity upgrades that will prevent us from doing anything like demand response, or electric vehicle, vehicle to home, vehicle to grid, or any of the other potential innovative technologies that we have on the horizon? And he said, no. There may be some things that need to be built in later on. We can incorporate those into the plan as we discover them. But what we really needed was to get the capacity building started right now. And I think that this plan really effectively accomplishes that. And we will follow close behind with the reliability and resiliency plan, which will address a lot of the things that you're concerned about.
Yeah, I guess, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I guess, there's a huge gulf between, and I don't think anybody wants a detailed plan or you to be taking your time right now doing a detailed plan in the faces. As you said, the future is uncertain. But there is a big difference between seeing something that says, we're going to plan for 6 kilowatt per house, and here's some, and a lot of what you've told me has given me faith that this is going to happen. But even some of the things you said, we're going to do this, and we're looking to see what happens, and then we'll do potentially something else. Yes, I believe that upgrading the grid is a no-brainer to the level here. Is it enough? I'm not convinced because I just haven't seen it behind it, and that would make me feel much better. And yes, we're going to consider these technologies, on this rough scale. Like, I'm not looking saying January 31st, we're going to start looking at X, Y, Z, but a fluid plan is fine, but it still doesn't, it needs to be said that yes, we're going to do this. We're going to commit to this, and we feel this is entirely robust to whatever SCAP may come up with, to whatever technologies maybe there in the future. This we can put off because the technology is changing. We don't need to do it, and we want to get started right now. That's great. I'd love to see that. I mean, that's maybe I'm, and I think you have it in your head, and it's great to hear it communicated. But like what's on paper, it's like, well, we want to go to 6 kilowatts, and it's going to cost between 226 million and 305. There's a lot of distance between that and a overly detailed plan, which I don't think anybody wants. I wouldn't want you to waste your time doing it for all the reasons you've described. So just again, thank you.
I guess I keep coming back to there is a information or communication gap that we're feeling that I think maybe if Jonathan, if you are, if you come back periodically or provide something, written materials so that we have that feedback, because what we get, we're not getting the SCAP piece, and we're not getting the behind the scenes conversation piece. And I think that could help us help in the whole process, right? I mean, our job is to be advisory, but if we don't have the foundation of what we're advising on, it's very hard to provide well-informed feedback. And it is a big project, and it is a lot of money, and the better we understand it, the more help we can provide. And I think the more comfort we can provide to the community. Frankly, it is a lot of money and disruption that we're asking for. And we don't want to stumble and set back our electrification goals either.
I think one thing that would help a lot with the, with providing that information is understanding a little bit more, because I hear a lot of different information gaps from different commissioners. I hear, for example, that some folks are concerned about how how grid modernization is going to affect things like, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. And that's not something that's in the plan yet, but that's coming in the reliability and resiliency plan. I hear other questions that where there's just more detail, there's curiosity about the detail of the technical assumptions embedded in the plan. I hear some questions about phasing, and I hear some questions, I think, about just how it interacts with the plan for, with the pace maybe that we see people electrifying their homes when we do planning for the SCAP as a whole too. And I think getting some sense of because each of those things probably need different communications from different people or in different contexts, or maybe they can be pulled together and broken out. I think just understanding what those are would help a lot in crafting those communications to help reassure the commission and give it what it needs to do its advisory work.
And what's the best way to convey that to you?
I mean, so I think we can try to distill some of the things that we've heard so far, but having some really concrete asks, concrete and specific asks, maybe by email from those commissioners who have specific questions would be really helpful. And
Okay.
I'm sorry to put extra work on your plate, but I think we're all, this is a really far-ranging issue. And I think we're kind of struggling with how to pull it together into something concise that will help.
Okay, we could do that. I think if we have individual emails going directly to the SCAP or to Jonathan and you, then we don't have any Brown Act issue, right? So we won't share them across the whole UAC.
So are we asking each of us to say what we would like to see in the plan, the elements we would like to see in the plan? Each one of us creates our list separately and emails them to one person, or?
Yeah, that's fine. You can send them all to me if you'd like. And then Jonathan and Tom and I can, review those and then see what's going on. And then, like I said, also too, is I'll get Brad Eggleston involved as well on what parts are in the SCAP and then the pieces that we don't have a plan for or what we need to pull from a utilities perspective.
There's no obligation. I mean,
Yeah.
You're right.
Commissioner Forcell? No. Was there anything, any other commissioners have any questions or comments? Really appreciate you joining us, Jonathan. I know you're not feeling well.
I have one more question. I'm sorry to ask this because some of you may be clearer than I am on it. But for me, it would just be helpful to understand between the SCAP and utilities and us, like how does SCAP, SCAP doesn't have a commission like the UAC is. And so when SCAP does its work and comes up, there's a plan that the city council wants to follow for SCAP, how does that roll through everything that the city does? Like who has jurisdiction over it? And how do we make sure that everybody's aligned on this? I just don't understand how it works. So I apologize for the rudimentary question, but I'm just wondering how it gets enacted.
Sure. So I can share that we have a few management structures. So the council ultimately delegated oversight of the SCAP to the SCAP, the council's ad hoc SCAP committee, which is 3 council members. And then we have an internal sustainability leadership team, which is a broad interdepartmental group that's focused on implementing all of the SCAP. And we have regular check-ins on, there are specific goals and key actions listed in the SCAP that they're working to implement. There are elements of this that, of course, require different feedback from different sorts of commissions. And so that may be, collected just as part of usual business. And then we have a leadership team within that sustainability team that is, regularly meeting to make sure that we're moving policy decisions forward and projects are getting accomplished. So it's a cross-departmental management structure. I think maybe some additional updates to this commission, because this commission is so heavily focused on utilities, which is so heavily focused on the really large scale vehicle and building decarbonization elements of the SCAP, which are, 2 of many elements of the SCAP. I think having some regular updates to this commission would maybe help, give some context and help with that understanding.
But then to translate that to utilities, does the SCAP plan essentially become a requirement for the utilities? So grid modernization, for example, would expand, the project itself would expand to incorporate other elements that the SCAP defined as a goal. So it's a kind of like, it becomes a framework that the utilities department has to implement?
Well, yes, but the utilities department is part of crafting the plan and proposal to council in the first place. So it's city policy, and so it's a collection of citywide commitments. But these citywide commitments were crafted as something that we believed we could accomplish, that staff believed staff could accomplish when we took it to council.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful to me. Thank you.
I have a much more mundane question. Going, very narrow. When the trial project that's going on now, that's already begun, right?
Correct.
And I would love to know what we learned, what were surprises, what went more smoothly, less smoothly, whatever. And then I don't know if this is unrealistic or just too scary, but do you think it would make sense to also do an underground pilot project earlier to kind of understand what the additional challenges are there?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we can consider. I know it's going to be difficult. I think so, but it doesn't hurt to take a look at that. I mean, we've done some rough look at facilities out there as part of our study. We looked at facilities, what kind of upgrades you're going to need. So we have some idea what that would look like in the underground districts. Part of the issue with that, a lot of it is very old infrastructure that's at 4 kV and it needs to be converted to 12 kV. That in itself is a big project. We have to essentially replace, in that case, we have to replace all the cables, including all the primary cables, and we have to do infrastructure work. And it would do, we do actually have quite a bit of experience with that. It's called underground districts. We know what that looks like. And like I said, we know it will be a very challenging project. And I think we know what has to be done. It's really around these issues of how to work in these neighborhoods. Some of the 4 kV neighborhoods are the Crescent Park area, and they're fairly small homes and small lots there, and it's all in subsurface vaults today. So if we come in there, we're going to be looking to pad mount, and people are not going to be, I think, very receptive. So we got to look at other alternatives. But and again, I'm not dismissing it. I think we can look at it earlier. I do think we sort of know what the challenges will be, and at this point, we're trying. I don't want to spend a lot of time chasing those when we could be spending on getting more customers converted. I guess that's essentially.
I guess not my only, but a concern is that we end up with a situation where the underground districts, or some of the underground districts, or the most challenging underground districts, are going to be on gas a lot longer and therefore bearing that burden. And so I just
I hear that. But I guess my response is somebody's going to have to be last, because we can't all go at the same time. So,
and can I speak to that point too? Somebody will have to be last, and and it's likely to be, it'll be underground. It could be underground folks. It could also be low income folks in multifamily housing, that lag behind a little bit. And one of the things we have to make sure is that and we don't want that to be the case. We're going to focus everything that we can on trying to, make sure that we don't leave people behind. But somebody is going to end up being last, and we have to make sure that those folks can affordably heat their homes, heat their water, And so that's something that we're looking at in terms of rate design and the long term and a funding study that's also in the work plan. There's going to have to be some money set aside for some amount of affordable heating or something in rate design. We can't just let the gas rates expand uncontrollably for those last few people. And that's what Dean was talking about when he talked about, there possibly needed to be some kind of a transfer between utilities or some combination of the gas and electric, of the energy utility funds in some way. These are just early ideas. There may be other approaches that work, but we're going to have to explore those things as well, so that those folks aren't burdened.
Okay, thanks. I think thank you, Mr. Marshall. Appreciate your time. And Jonathan, thank you as well. We will turn to any commissioner comments and reports from meetings and events, if anyone has any. Oh, yes, Commissioner Forcell.
I didn't go to a meeting or event, but I did read a really interesting article that I wanted to ask if there. IEEE Spectrum in March 23 had an article called the EV Transition Explained, and City of Palo Alto Utilities Grid Modernization was Chapter 3. The title, Can the Grid Cope? And they had covered our February meeting of last year and talked about some of the challenges, which is what we've been talking about now. So I highly recommend it. And Can the Grid Cope was like one of 14, I'm making that number up, on the order of 14 obstacles to an EV transition. So I just thought it was really interesting, lengthy reading if there are commissioners that are interested. And maybe I can email it to Tabitha and you can forward it out to the UAC so we don't inadvertently engage in an email discussion.
I would second that. I read the article. I read it as well. It was extremely enlightening. I found it very enlightening.
Thank you. And any topics for future meetings that's not already on the list?
One question I had, are we meeting in July last?
Yes, we are going to stick with our regularly scheduled time of July 5th. There are enough commissioners available that will have a quorum. Thanks all for responding to Tabitha on that. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Sorry, Chair Siegel. So one of the things that I've challenged the rest of the staff that, some of these, I know that you've been waiting patiently on some of these items that when we talked about this 5-year look back on our projects on the electric and water and gas, as well as some of the water quality issues. I think that we owe you an update on some fiber hut counts on the fiber portion. So long story short here is that I challenge the staff that we have put all of these items into the upcoming months. And the challenge is that we will take the ones that have been on here for quite some time, and we'll have all the reports and the presentations done by the end of the year. So that's my goal, and to try to get some of this off that you've been very kind of waiting on some of this updates for quite some time in some of these.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. Shall we move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, wave your hand. Thank you, everyone. See you July 5th.